Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. The Confederate soldier pictured here is William Edward Sims, and he posed for this photograph after he advanced to Sergeant Major of the 21st Mississippi Infantry. That was on New Year's Day of 1864. He's got his boots, he's got his chevrons, he's got a stripe around his cuffs. He's holding his hat in his hand, that hand resting on a chair. If you look closely, you'll see the dark canvas backdrop that's tacked up next to a bright colored wall, probably giving some reflection of light so that we can get the best possible likeness. It's a wonderful photograph, and it was brought to my attention by Andrew Waldo, who generously shared information and research that he'd collected. Behind this portrait is a larger story of a family of extreme wealth, the center of which was the family's estate, Woodlands Plantation, located near Woodville, the seat of Wilkinson County in Mississippi, also the hometown of Jefferson Davis. Wilkinson County is tucked into the farthest southwest corner of the state with easy access to the Mississippi River and the cotton trade. The various members of the expanded Sims family held about 150 slaves. That's according to the 1860 slave schedule, which tracked enslaved people for census and tax purposes. 81 of those slaves were credited to William's father, the family patriarch, James Hampton Sims. The elder Sims and his wife, Mary, who died young, they had three boys who all served as officers in the 21st Mississippi. The three boys were educated at one of America's elite schools, Yale University. Following graduation in 1861, William, or Willie, or Billy, as he was known to friends and family, returned to Woodlands, where his father, who did not serve in the army, but supported the Confederate cause by burning 208,000 pounds of cotton rather than let it fall into the hands of the Yankees. The elder Sims died in 1863 of no military causes, natural causes, never knowing the outcome of the war. Willie, young Willie, he promptly enlisted after he returned from Yale to Mississippi in the 21st as a private, joining his two brothers, John Jr. and Robert. Now, John, the oldest brother, John Hampton Sims, named for his father, had been educated, as I mentioned, at Yale, became a physician. He rose with the 21st from lieutenant to lieutenant colonel, and he lost his life during the Battle of Cedar Creek. That was in October of 1864 in Virginia. One of John's brothers one of John's brother officers had this to say about John Jr. What a thrill the mention of his name causes to pass through the hearts of those who have seen his dark eyes flash with delight on the battlefront. I am partial to his memory because in the army we shared the same blanket when we had one to share, and I never knew a grander man, a soldier in every sense of the word. He fell in the full tide of victory with his feet to the foe and his face to the skies. So that's John. Willie's other brother, Robert Gill Sims, began his service as a sergeant and advanced to become the regiment's adjutant. He suffered a wound at Gettysburg and was captured by Union forces at Spotsylvania, being imprisoned for the rest of the war at Johnson's Island in Ohio. That leaves young Willie Sims. Following in his brother's footsteps as a soldier, he proved his mettle in combat during the Peninsula Campaign and also the Overland Campaign and operations in the Shenandoah Valley. Willie was not without injury. He suffered a slight wound in the left eye. That was the result of a gunshot in the wilderness. Then, months later at Cedar Creek, the same battle that claimed his older brother John, Willie received a severe gunshot wound to his right foot and fell into enemy hands. So it's about 10 months after this photograph was taken. Union surgeons treated the captured Willie. They amputated part of the foot, and then he was held at Point Lookout, Maryland. Then he was released and eventually retired from active duty because he was hobbled by his injury. And then he spent the remainder of the war with the Invalid Corps in Mississippi. It was about this time, while he was in Mississippi, when Willie wrote to one of his old professors at Yale. If you look in the annals of the university's history, you'll find an accounting of the letter that Willie wrote and why he wrote it. This passage tells you all you need to know. It goes like this: coming as he did from the extreme South and belonging to the slaveholding class, he, Willie, naturally was intensely Southern in all his sympathies, which, however, he never permitted to abate his affectionate loyalty to Yale and to his classmates. Notwithstanding the outbreak of hostilities in the spring of 1861, he remained to graduate when, communication through the lines being interrupted, he had no money to take him home. Professor Thomas A. Thatcher loaned him the necessary funds, and he went his way to ally himself with his beloved Southland. Of course, during wartime, he could not repay the money, but as soon as the war was over, he wrote to Professor Thatcher that he would do so at the earliest possible moment, saying, quote, "I have lost everything. My father is dead. Our plantation is desolated. The cotton has been burned, and the slaves are scattered. I am crippled for life, and worst of all, I have been compelled to take the oath of allegiance to a government I despise." End quote. The passage in the Yale history continues. About 6 months later, he repaid Professor Thatcher, and the next few years brought with them a complete revulsion of feeling. Revulsion of feeling in this case means a transformation. The passage continues. He hardly accepted the results of the war and became prominent in the Republican politics of Virginia. The Republican politics of Virginia, receiving from that party a nomination to Congress and an election as delegate to several national conventions. And in 1890, President Harrison, Benjamin Harrison, appointed him United States Consul at Cologne, Republic of Colombia. So here's where the Yale history ends. It is remarkable in such accounts to illustrate this kind of a transformation in feelings, to find it recorded in a single place and done so succinctly and without embellishment. It's unusual. Now, I want to give you a bit of detail to better appreciate Willie's transformation. Willie left Mississippi for Virginia, where he became a successful attorney. And the reason he left for Virginia is he married a woman who was from the Commonwealth. As Reconstruction unfolded, late 1860s, getting into the early 1870s, Willie switched his political allegiance from the Democrats, classic Southern Democrats, to Lincoln's Republican Party. During this time, in the 1870s, a political movement in Virginia resulted in a biracial party that dedicated itself to tearing down the wealth and privilege that the elite white ruling class had occupied, especially targeting planters. They also wanted to promote public education to make good citizens of everyone, no matter what their color. Thus was born the Readjuster Party. That's its name. And its best known leader was a former Confederate general, William Mahone. The Readjusters continued to gain momentum in the late 1870s, early 1880s until 1883, when white Democrats took back control of the state government. That same year, Willie, I mentioned he had married a Virginian, ran for his father in law's old state Senate seat, which was at the time held by a Democrat named John L. Hurt. What happened next is perhaps best told by Henry R. Mitchell. He wrote biographical sketches of the Sims family, and he summarized the fall of the readjusters and Willie's role in it. Mitchell wrote, according to undocumented local folklore, the rhetoric of the campaign became so heated that Hurt felt it necessary to carry firearms at all times, even on the Senate floor in Richmond. Finally, in racially tense Danville in November, during the week before the election, Sims, Willie, delivered a passionate speech to a large gathering of his black followers, during which he read an incendiary document circulated by his opponents who were attempting to suppress the black votes. The speech was followed the next day by a violent riot, probably precipitated by Willie's opponents, who then blamed Willie both locally and nationally. A congressional investigation ensued. Racial fears fanned by news of the Danville riot resulted in the turning out of office of the readjuster Republican political machine in Virginia and was a significant factor in precipitating the eclipse of the Republican Party in the South for nearly a century and the widespread introduction of Jim Crow segregation laws and practices. Willie, in fear of his and his family's lives, more or less fled Virginia for the safety of Washington, D.C. In 1890, Republican President Benjamin Harrison appointed Willie consul to Colombia. A year later, in 1891, Willie died in Colombia after a brief illness. He was 49 years old. So thanks for listening to this story of transformation from a Mississippi planter's son to a graduate at Yale who didn't have enough money to get back home, to a Confederate officer, badly wounded and crippled for life as a result. Then a politician in Virginia, a member of the biracial readjuster party, his ouster, and then more political service, government service under President Benjamin Harrison, a Union general during the Civil War. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.